November 12, 1942. Richmond, California. A mountain of steel, a 441-foot-long cargo ship, slides down the slipway and crashes into the waters of San Francisco Bay. It was a common sight during the war, but this vessel, the SS Robert E. Peary, was different. It wasn't the product of months of painstaking labor. It was fully assembled, from its first steel plate to its final rivet, in an unbelievable 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes. To grasp the sheer scale of that achievement, consider this. A typical cargo ship of its era took an average of 230 days to construct. This wasn't just building faster. This was a complete defiance of industrial logic. How did a nation transform an 8-month process into a task completed in less than 5 days? The answer would redefine the limits of production and provide the ultimate weapon to win the war. This confidence was not unfounded. It was a belief forged in steel and poured in concrete across a continent. This was the Atlantic Wall, a line of defense stretching 2,400 miles from Norway to the Spanish border. German propaganda hailed it as the most formidable defensive line in military history, an assertion seemingly backed by its colossal construction. The project had consumed 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel. It was a monumental feat of engineering designed to justify the one ultimate proclamation from Hitler himself. The wall was impregnable. At Omaha Beach alone, the defenses seemed to justify such confidence, with 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, and 85 machine gun nests. The beach itself had been turned into a killing field, sown with 3,700 obstacles like Belgian gates and Czech hedgehogs, many tipped with mines. Behind it all lay a sea of 6.5 million mines. This supreme confidence flowed from the very top. Just 3 days before, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself, the celebrated Desert Fox, had personally inspected their positions. Rommel had peered through Heinrich Severloh's own gun aperture, studying the meticulously planned, overlapping fields of fire before nodding with satisfaction. His assessment lent the weight of legend to their perceived invincibility. When they come, Rommel had told the defenders, this beach will be their cemetery. It was a promise from Germany's most respected commander, an ironclad guarantee that the wall would hold. For the men of Strongpoint WN62, it was not a question of if they could win, but how quickly. Yet the greatest threat to the Atlantic Wall wasn't an enemy weapon, but the weather. On June 5, Luftwaffe meteorologist Walter Stubbe declared an invasion impossible. His forecast, based on data from U-boats and weather stations, predicted that high winds, 6-foot waves, and low clouds would persist for at least 2 weeks. This meteorological confidence proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Trusting this forecast, many senior officers left their posts. Rommel himself departed for Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday, carrying a pair of gray suede shoes he had bought in Paris. General Friedrich Dollmann, commanding the 7th Army, ordered his division commanders to attend war games. The entire defensive chain of command was relaxed. Unknown to the Germans, the Allies possessed weather stations in Greenland and flew weather flights over the Atlantic. This superior intelligence allowed them to detect a brief, 36-hour break in the storm, a window that General Eisenhower seized to launch the invasion. As the storm of steel gathered at sea, the first drops of the invasion began to fall from the sky. At 23:15 on June 5, German radar stations began detecting massive aerial formations approaching the coast. Operators, accustomed to Allied deception raids, initially dismissed the contacts, but by midnight, reports that challenged all assumptions began flooding in. Paratroopers were landing across Normandy. The reports made no sense. Some units reported landings in the east, others in the west. Some claimed the invaders were British, others American. Adding to the chaos were dummy paratroopers, fitted with firecrackers, dropped as part of Operations Titanic and Rupert. This phantom army drew German units into chasing shadows. Major Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer Grenadier regiment, immediately grasped the gravity of the situation and requested permission to attack. The crippling response from his headquarters, "Do not move until the situation clarifies." Von Luck would later write, "I knew at that moment we were lost, yet we sat paralyzed by our own command structure." As the first gray light of dawn on June 6 began to illuminate the English Channel, German observers in forward positions reported something their training had never prepared them for. From horizon to horizon, the sea was covered with vessels, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands. Ships of every size and description, from massive battleships to tiny landing craft, spread across the water like a vast gray carpet. This was the Allied invasion fleet, the largest naval armada ever assembled in human history, consisting of 6,939 vessels. According to official Allied records, this included 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, and over 1,600 support and merchant ships. For the German defenders, raised on propaganda about Allied weakness and division, the sight was psychologically devastating. One artillery officer at WN 62, Bernhard Furking, reportedly told his men they were witnessing the whole world arriving on their doorstep. The sheer, undeniable reality of this force shattered their ideological confidence in an instant. At 5:35 hours, the naval bombardment commenced, unleashing a level of violence that nothing in the German defenders' experience, not even the Eastern Front, had prepared them for. The battleship USS Texas alone fired 255 14-inch shells at Point du Hoc in just 34 minutes, each shell weighing as much as a small car. The HMS Warspite would deliver over 300 15-inch shells in the first 2 days. This was not a battle. It was a form of industrial annihilation delivered from the sea. According to German veterans, the concrete bunkers they had believed to be invincible began to crack and crumble like sandcastles under the relentless naval gunfire. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. Men were buried alive by collapsing fortifications, dug out by their comrades, only to be buried again by the next salvo. The sheer, unending power of the assault was incomprehensible. The fortifications in which they had placed their absolute confidence were being systematically dismantled, and with them, any hope of withstanding the storm that was to follow. As the naval guns thundered, the skies over Normandy revealed the true desperation of the German position. The Luftwaffe, which had once promised absolute air superiority over any invasion, was nowhere to be found. When Oberst Joseph Pips Priller, commander of Jagerschwader 26, received orders to attack the invasion fleet with his entire force, his response was recorded in the Wing's war diary. "What entire force? I have 2 planes." What followed became a symbol of German impotence. Priller and his wingman, Heinz Wudersick, made the only Luftwaffe attack on the beaches during the morning of June 6. The 2 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters made a single, desperate strafing run over Sword Beach before fleeing from overwhelming Allied fighter cover. It was a futile gesture. These 2 planes were the sum of Germany's aerial response against an Allied force that would fly 14,674 sorties that day, compared to the Luftwaffe's meager 319. The promised knights of the air, who were supposed to darken the skies, had been reduced to a single fleeting pass. At 6:35, as the first American landing craft dropped their ramps, Heinrich so began firing. His position, one of the few undamaged by the bombardment, commanded perfect fields of fire across Omaha Beach. His MG-42, firing at a blistering 1,200 rounds per minute in short, controlled bursts, contributed significantly to the carnage that would earn the beach its name, Bloody Omaha. But what followed was a new kind of psychological horror that hardened veterans had never faced. The German defenders began experiencing what military historians call material shock, the mental breakdown caused by confronting an overwhelming and seemingly infinite force. No matter how many Americans fell on the sand, more appeared. For every landing craft destroyed, 3 more seemed to take its place. Every time a German machine gun was silenced, it was suppressed by naval gunfire that seemed unlimited. For so, the tactical success of his position was irrelevant. He was one man with 1 gun against an unstoppable human tide, a horrifying equation that was rapidly eroding his sanity. While the infantry bled on the beaches, the one force that Rommel had insisted must defeat the invasion on the first day, the Panzer divisions, remained inexplicably paralyzed. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit close enough to the beaches to make a difference, sat idle for the most critical hours of the morning. Command indecision and a rigid structure that required Hitler's personal approval for major movements meant that the division did not receive orders to attack until 10 o'clock hours, a full 4 hours after the landings began. When the 21st Panzer finally attacked late that afternoon, they made a desperate push, and became the only German armored unit to reach the coast on D-Day. But it was too little, too late. As they reached the shore, they witnessed the arrival of Operation Mallard, a massive air armada of 250 gliders bringing reinforcements to the British airborne forces. Fearing their flanks were about to be cut off, the panzers withdrew. In a single day, the division lost nearly a quarter of its strength. The armored fist that was meant to smash the invasion had been held back by its own leadership until it could do little more than punch at the air. By midday, a new crisis was spreading through the German defenses. one more fundamental than strategy or tactics. They were running out of bullets. The defensive plans had calculated ammunition expenditure for repelling a limited assault, not the largest invasion in human history. Positions that had been supplied for a 3-day battle exhausted their ammunition within hours. Attempts to bring forward reserve stocks were futile. Every road and railway was under constant attack from Allied fighter bombers, creating a logistical stranglehold. The contrast with Allied firepower was stark and demoralizing. German observers watched in disbelief as American destroyers fired hundreds of shells at a single target, a level of expenditure they could no longer imagine. By the afternoon, German artillery batteries, the backbone of their defense, were being rationed to just 4 shells per gun, per day. They were facing an enemy with a seemingly infinite arsenal, while they were forced to count their last rounds. Amidst the unfolding disaster, brief flashes of German tactical brilliance still occurred, but they only served to highlight the futility of the larger strategic situation. On June 13, SS tank ace Michael Wittmann achieved one of the most stunning victories of the campaign. In the Battle of Villers-Bocage, he single-handedly destroyed between 13 and 14 British tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and up to 15 personnel carriers in just 15 minutes. German propaganda seized on the victory as proof that the German soldier could still prevail. But the aftermath of the battle revealed a sobering truth. Wittmann's own Tiger tank was disabled in the fight, and replaced by the Germans only with great difficulty. The dozens of British vehicles he had destroyed were replaced within hours. This single event was a perfect parable for the entire Normandy campaign. The tactical brilliance of an individual German soldier could not overcome industrial mathematics. Wittmann himself would be killed on August 8, eliminated by an enemy that could afford to trade 10 tanks for one irreplaceable Tiger ace. The Normandy campaign reached its apocalyptic climax in a killing ground known as the Falaise Pocket. From August 12 to the 21st, this encirclement became the graveyard of the German forces in Normandy. German soldiers who attempted to escape described scenes of almost unimaginable destruction. The roads were carpeted with the wreckage of burning vehicles and the bodies of dead horses. There was no escape from the onslaught. Allied fighter bombers attacked in relentless waves, appearing every 20 minutes, while artillery fell continuously. The systematic destruction was so absolute that many soldiers simply gave up, preferring the certainty of captivity to the certainty of death. When the pocket was finally cleared, the scale of the disaster was laid bare. Approximately 10,000 Germans had died. Another 50,000 were captured. Over 300 tanks and 2,500 other vehicles were left as twisted monuments to a completely annihilated army. The most objective and damning assessments of the disaster came from the German commanders themselves. On August 1, General Heinrich Severloh, who had assumed command in Normandy, sent a stark report to high command. He stated, "The enemy's material superiority is at least 20 to 1 in artillery, 10 to 1 in tanks, and absolute in aircraft." He concluded with a chillingly simple logistical truth. He can replace all losses within days. We cannot replace anything. But the most powerful testament came from Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. In his final report to Hitler on July 15, just 2 days before he was severely wounded by Allied aircraft, Germany's most celebrated commander wrote, "The troops are fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle is nearing its end. I must beg you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay." This was not a request for reinforcements. It was carefully phrased military language for complete and irreversible defeat. The verdict from the field was unanimous. Courage alone could not overcome industrial supremacy. The German generals were correct. The Normandy campaign revealed that World War II had become a production war, and the German soldier was facing an enemy that defied comprehension. The true victor was not a general, but the Allied factory. At peak production, Ford's Willow Run plant alone produced one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. In 1944, American factories produced 96,000 aircraft. The disparity was present in every facet of the war. Allied ammunition expenditure in a single day exceeded what Germany could produce in a month. A single American division consumed more supplies daily than an entire German corps. Within days of the landing, the Allies were bringing ashore 15,000 tons of supplies daily, more than the entire German army in Normandy consumed in a week. Hans von Luck, a German officer, reflected on this reality in his memoir, writing, "We learned that modern war was not about tactics or courage but about production. The Americans had turned war into an industrial process. They manufactured victory on assembly lines." The German soldiers who survived Normandy were psychologically transformed. They had witnessed the complete invalidation of everything they had been taught about warfare, racial superiority, and national destiny. Heinrich Severloh, the machine gunner from WN-62, spent the rest of his life haunted by his experience. In his later years, after meeting American D-Day veterans, he wrote, "We all realized we had been young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13,500 rounds meant nothing against their unlimited replacements." This epiphany was shared by commanders as well. Friedrich von der Haidt, an elite paratrooper commander, became a professor of international law after the war. He wrote that Normandy taught a profound lesson. The era of warrior heroes was over. War had become a matter of industrial capacity, and we had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with horses and outdated dreams. For these survivors, the battle was not just a defeat, but a revelation that ended one age of warfare and began another.